Thanks everyone so much for joining us. We're going to get started in just a second. Um, okay, thank you everyone for joining us today. My name is Jackie Garlock. I'm with the Community Technical Assistance Center of New York. I'm delighted to welcome everyone to today's webinar, Introduction to Family Therapy with Adolescents with Dr. Michael Davidovitz. Um, Before we get started, I'm just going to take a moment to orient everybody so we all know how to participate in today's event. Just everyone should know that on joining the webinar, you are placed on mute. If you need anything, please, you can use the chat to the hosts, and we will do our best to attend to your needs. If you would like to activate closed captions for the presentation today, you can do so by clicking the button on your toolbar that says Live Transcript. Oh, I realized I was not sharing my screen. Oh, I am sharing my screen. Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Thanks, Angelique. Um, and please do so. You can activate closed captions by clicking the button on your toolbar that says Live Transcript and then selecting Show Subtitles. We also want to mention that AI bots such as Otter AI are not permitted to join CTAC offerings. So apologies for that if that is something people use. Um, Please chat in your questions throughout the presentation today. We'll have a Q&A at the end of the presentation today, but if you use the chat box throughout, we'll be taking your questions and then presenting them at the end. Um, we are offering 2.5 continuing education credits today for eligible folks. That includes what do we now? Counselors, social workers, marriage and family therapists, psychoanalysts, and psychologists. You must be present for at least 3/4 of the presentation and be signed on with your own Zoom link and be on a computer. And if you're eligible, we'll send you instructions on how to get your CEs in the next couple business days. Um, so we are also putting a pre-test in the chat today. If everyone could take a chance to click that link, uh, it will take you to just a pre-survey. Um, and we would ask you all to do that while we're getting started. So for those of you who are typing into the chat about the CEs, you'll get an email in your inbox after the presentation about CEs, and then you'll log on to the portal and you'll fill some things out that way, and then it'll send you the CEs. I don't believe that we have anything for creative art therapists, Robert, but I can double check on that. Um, and yes, the Zoom link is the one that you got when you registered. So as you all, again, we just put the pre-survey link in the chat. So if folks could please click on that and then please go and take a second to fill it out while we're getting started. Thanks, Angelique, for putting that in again. And while you all are doing that, I'm going to introduce you to Dr. Michael Davidovitz. He is a lecturer at the Narrative Medicine program at Columbia University, a clinical supervisor, um, and a clinical supervisor in the family medicine residency program at Columbia, and then also a teaching faculty member at the Ackerman Institute for the Family. He offers trainings and workshops on conducting family therapy with adolescents and narrative medicine in primary care settings, and has his own private psychotherapy practice in Manhattan. So while folks are getting started on the pre-survey, I will hand it over to you, Dr. Davidovitz, to get started.
Okay, thanks, Jackie. Um, so, um, I'm going to start from about 30,000 feet with some kind of overarching ideas. Want to talk a little bit about what we mean when we say systemic family therapy, and what's sort of different about that from maybe a more individually focused model. And then I want to talk a little bit about sort of how these concepts apply, in particular with adolescents. Most of our time today, though, will really be focused on the kind of nuts and bolts of working in a family therapy setting with adolescents and their parents. Um, what are the ideas you work with? What are the questions you ask? How do you sequence things? Um, so that my hope is that you can come away with at least some idea of what it means to do systemic work with adolescents and their families, and a kind of rough map of what that work looks like. Um, I should say that I this material that I'm going to present today um, is the result of a project that I worked on with my mentor Peggy Papp, um, who was one of the sort of founding people of systemic family therapy at Ackerman. Um, she died about 6 years ago at the age of 98. So I always like to invoke her memory. Whatever's good about this presentation, she gets credit. Whatever is not so good, I'll take the blame. Um, so I um, I guess I think we'll just this is you can take a moment to sort of think about this. Sometimes I like to break up people into small groups to talk about this. But I think it's nice to kind of take a moment and just sort of think about these questions and think, what do adolescents really need from the adults in their lives? What do they need from their parents? And what do they need from us as therapists? Um, I guess the quality of the material that I'm going to present really sort of rests on um, whether it resonates with what about what it is to be an adolescent and your experience with that. So you can take a moment to sort of reflect on these questions. Um, so I do like to start with sort of big ideas. I think we live in a moment in society in which we tend to focus a lot on information, and then we tend to also focus a lot on like questions like how do I do that? And that's a good question. How do I do that? But I really think uh, like how what you do depends so much on how you think about what it is that needs to be done. And a lot of that depends on what you think about the problem. Like, what is the problem? How do I formulate that problem in my head? And I think if we're not aware of how we're thinking about problems, um, then the interventions that we come up with are scattershot and don't really have an organization or a goal connected with them. And often we're not aware of our own sort of conceptual prejudices that we're bringing into these things. Um, so when I talk about systems work, I'm going to talk for a moment here as though I think doing individual therapy is a really bad idea, which I don't actually think individual therapy is a bad idea. In the history of family therapy, there was a time, in the 60s, 70s, even 80s, at Ackerman Institute, for example, which was the institute I'm affiliated with, where if you were coming for help at Ackerman, um, you weren't allowed to be in individual therapy. You certainly couldn't be there if you were on faculty in individual therapy, if you were in faculty or if you were studying there. I don't think anybody holds that kind of rigid prejudice anymore. I certainly don't. But I do think it's just for the sake of understanding um, what systems work means. Um, I think like we live in a society, I think, where we focus a lot on the individual. And if you begin with thinking about the individual, the questions you end up asking are, who are you? Or what are you? Um, and the questions that come out of that are, okay, if that's what you are, how are you doing with being what you say that you are, right? Like, how are you doing with being um, a doctor, a teacher, a therapist, a mother, a father, a man, a woman, a son? Um, and we get evaluated, in these terms. We evaluate ourselves with these questions. How am I doing with that? With being what I purport to be? Um, and inevitably that kind of monitoring leads to um, a kind of private despair that is based on like the kind of sense of like as soon as we ask that question, we start monitoring ourselves for how well we're doing and being the things that we purport to be. It can't help but be the case that we worry that we're inadequate and that there's some sense of inadequacy and shame that becomes a private despair that leads um, then to more of a sense of isolation um, and um, and self-correction, which leads to more monitoring. If I'm not doing well at what did I purport to be, how am I going to do better? Um, and I mean, we see this, um, for example, in psychiatric hospitals. What you have to do to be able to get out of a psychiatric hospital is that you have to um, describe yourself as being a certain way. Well, I am a schizophrenic, and how am I doing with that? Am I monitoring myself well enough? Do I have insight? And am I monitoring my symptoms? So we actually demand of people who come into psychiatric hospitals and then get discharged that their self-monitoring systems are in place and are functioning. And that's when we consider them to be well enough to be discharged. But we all do this to some extent or another, right? We are individuals who are concerned with how we're doing at being who we are, which again um, leads to this kind of private despair. Um, the question we ask, in a systems approach, on the other hand, are what are you connected to? Um, what's closest to you? And, like the what there, means uh, all kinds of things. Means certainly, an idea, an identity, a community, a profession. First and foremost, though, it probably means other people with whom I have close relationships, family members, coworkers, friends, community members. Um, so the question I ask is not who are you, but what are you connected to? What are your important relationships? People are viewed and understood in a context. And the assumption is that we are what we are in terms of the context in which we live. And the question is, how are you doing in those relationships? How are those relationships feeling to you? And the follow-up question for there, instead of self-correction, the follow-up question is, um, what could you do to make these relationships better, for yourself? You know, uh, Relationships, like better, more connected, relationships that foster happiness, satisfaction, a sense of aliveness, a sense of being able to love and being loved. Um, we ask, um, who can you address? Who can you talk to? And what would you want to say to them that would make these relationships better, and in making these relationships better, that you would feel better? Um, what kind of conversations can you have with people? What would those look like? Um, and conversations take different forms. I mean, there's a conversation that can have that promotes, when we're talking about social justice, who would you like to talk to about that? Maybe that's an individual. Maybe it's standing up in vocal protest. Maybe it's talking to an institution that you're part of. Um, you like, so these questions are about being an agent of change in the relationships in your own life, um, which is always, like the question is not how do I force my way in, but how can I be an agent of change in a way that is relational, where I am um, talking to people in a way that yields a connection and something that comes back. I feel a sense of positive impact. Uh, so, instead of sort of the feeling of private despair that a very individual focus generates, I'm here asking questions that generate a feeling of positive impact. I can't always control the circumstances of my life, but I can make certain decisions about my relationship to those circumstances. I can't always control the people in my life, but um, I can I can make certain decisions about how I want that relationship to be. And when it comes to relationships with individuals, I can also like, what do you want to do about the relationship? It's also a you plural, right? Like, what do the two of you, three of you, four of you want to do about your relationship? So the impact is on something in the world, something that I'm connecting with. Um, and, you know, it's always, in connecting with the world and improving the relationship, I'm moving out of a place of isolation and, a lot of the despair and unhappiness that comes with that, into a relationship in which hopefully there's more of a feeling of love, more of a feeling of connection. Um, and, that's the emphasis that we have in doing systemic work. Um, this becomes very important in doing work with adolescents and their parents, uh, because in this relationship, it very easily lends itself to these kinds of acts of self-monitoring, and these kinds of acts of um, self-correction for adolescents, because they don't know who they are. They're trying to figure it out, and they try, like whatever identity they're trying to sort of connect with, the sense of inadequacy, of incompetence, of not doing it right, generates a lot of private despair and anxiety for adolescents. Um, and likewise, to be a parent of an adolescent, is hard. I mean, I always like to say to families, adolescence is new. Um, it's a concept that is about 100 years old, maybe a little bit older, but not much. Comes around in like the beginning part of the 20th century, with the advent of industrialization, urbanization, where the idea of separation, that people should separate from their families, becomes more prevalent. It was less of a thing in more agriculturally based societies. So we're still trying to figure out what adolescents need, and how to attend to their needs. So parents are also in a place of wondering if they're doing it right, feeling like they're probably doing it wrong, which generates again its own a kind of private despair. When you have, when you have people in a relationship who are both dealing with that kind of private despair, there's a feeling of disconnection. And it gives rise to a lot of conflict in and of itself. Um, I'm sure, you can think about that in your own relationships when there's a feeling of disconnection. The disconnection itself gives rise to conflict. So we have an important opportunity in dealing with in family therapy with really reconnecting people in a way that they begin to feel more of a sense of positive impact, which helps with their sense of self, and more of a sense of connection, which I mean, that's where our joy and our sense of well-being comes from in life, when we feel meaningfully connected to the people who are important to us. Um, so what we end up focusing on in systems work with families, we end up focusing on the cycles of interaction. Um, we think about things that we are related to. We're related to a lot of things, but in family therapy, we're focusing mainly on the cycles of interaction, which I'll explain in a minute what I mean by cycles of interaction. Um, so I'm moving from the big ideas to ideas that are a little bit more specifically connected to adolescents and doing family work with adolescents. A couple of guiding principles. You know, eh, Problems for adolescents. Um, don't always begin. I certainly don't make the assumption when people come in for family therapy, that it is because there's something wrong with the dynamics in the family, that the family that there's conflict in the family, or that the adolescent is having problems. Sometimes it's because of family dynamics, but other times it's not. And I'll give an example of this in a second. But I a lot of time, I mean, every relationship, whether it's a couple or whether it's a family, no relationships are perfect. They all have fault lines, places where people get into arguments with each other, where there's disagreements, where there's hurt, um, maybe because of things that happened in history, or maybe places where people just don't understand each other. It's inevitable. And when and sometimes those fault lines create problems in and of themselves. People feel misunderstood. People feel not attended to, that their needs aren't being taken into consideration. Um, but sometimes problems start from the outside and create stress, but the stress always flows into the fault line in the relationship, so that it looks like a family problem, even though the problem started outside of the family. So, when I try to figure out what's going on in a family, when did the problem start? Um, what else is going on? Families may say, we're just not getting along. When did the problem start? It started when, Joe started middle school. So what happened when Joe started middle school, right? Like something happened. A lot of things start coming to the surface when people start middle school, right? So it could be that stress that gets into the family. Um, but once it becomes a family conflict, um, the isolation, the conflict between family members makes the problem worse. And the problem is usually only going to resolve itself once we resolve the conflict within the family, even if the problem originated on the outside. Um, so And in doing that from a systemic frame, I mean, if you look at it from an individual frame, what we tend to do is we tend to say, who's this person? Who's that person? What is this person doing wrong? What do they need to change? Okay, they should engage in self-correction. The father's too critical and too emotionally cold. Uh, the son has impulse control problems, so they each have a self-correction project that they need to engage in. From a systemic standpoint, what we look at is how people are interacting with each other and how their interaction with each other generates conflict and misunderstandings that make perhaps everyone unhappy. So this is I mean, it's, inevitably in a presentation like this, I'm, gonna do a lot of generalization, but I find that this generalization, this map, this sort of generalized map of the cycle of interaction in adolescent families holds true well enough in any case. Um, and you can start it at any point in this diagram. Um, so, like I generally what happens is, there's um, when families come in, it's almost always something's going on with the adolescent. Um, and the parents are anxious. And parents, when they get anxious, and I'll just say as an aside, when I say parent, I mean that term more or less generically, like whoever's in the parent seat. It could be another family member, could be an adoptive parent, but whoever's in the parent seat. Um, when parents get worried, they tend to try to move towards control. Like they try to correct. Um, in general, whenever we get worried and we get worried about what people are up to in a relationship, we try to either um, get back the relationship by sort of force, by criticism, pulling out fingers, or some people withdraw. And one of the paradoxes in human relationships is that when we feel disconnection, we engage in strategies that often lead to more disconnection. Um, like criticism, like judgment, like withdrawal. These are all, in some sense, self-protective mechanisms that we use to try to deal with disconnection that foster more disconnection. And that's what happens, in families with troubled adolescents as well. The parents try to um, correct what they're anxious about, the behavior that they're anxious about in their child. And the child feels criticized, feels controlled. Um, Adolescents don't like to feel criticized or controlled. I'll talk about this more in a second, but nobody likes to feel criticized or controlled, but adolescents in particular um, are tend to flee. They're much more interested in just looking for where the fun is, where the pleasure is. So when they feel criticized and controlled, they move away from the relationship. And in moving away from the relationship, often the problem gets worse. I'll just give a quick clinical example. So this is an example of a family in which, the way I conceptualize it, um, the stress really comes from the outside. Um, and again, like, is there things going on in the family dynamics? There always are, but the stress flows into the family dynamics. This is a two-person family, a, um, a mother and her son. The son, I'll call him Ray, call the mother Barbara. The son, Ray, is the biological son of Barbara's older sister. Barbara's older sister, who lives in another part of the country, I should say, lived. She had a lot of problems with drugs uh, and mental health issues. She was at some point prostituting herself to be able to buy drugs. And Ray is the product of her and a client. Um, the family, Barbara and her sister, parents are Asian. Ray is mixed race. It seems like his father, who nobody knows who that person is, seemed like he was of African descent. Just looking at how Ray looks, he looks more African American than he does Asian. Um, so Ray was taken away from his biological mother at birth, and Barbara, who was single, always wanted a child, um, uh, said, "I'll take him." He came to live with her. Eventually, she adopted him, and they had a very close relationship. Barbara was estranged from her parents. There were a lot of things going on in that family. That were a lot of conflict. So she moved way across the country when she was quite young and is estranged from her parents. Wanted to give to Ray all of the love, that she felt that she didn't get. Support him, get him the best possible education. She found him, Barbara didn't have a lot of money, but she found him scholarships to go to uh, good private schools in New York City, and they were very close. Um, but I mean, like you can already sort of see some of the ways in which, they both carry a lot of baggage, I guess you could say, that of course is going to affect their relationship. But what happened was as Ray entered middle school, he did very well through grade school, but as he entered middle school, he began to have problems. There's a lot of kids who enter middle school. A lot of the times problems do emerge there for the first time. Executive functioning problems because kids have to be more in charge of moving from classroom to classroom, social issues as social pressure ramps up, sometimes latent mental health issues emerge, that up until that point remained below the surface. For Ray, he began to have trouble academically, which he had never had before. He had some executive functioning issues and some processing issues. He was in a very competitive private school, mostly white kids in the private school. He felt very out of place there, um, and very unhappy. Uh, and the first thing that Barbara, the first thing that she caught whiff of was that his grades were plummeting, and she was getting bad reports from the teachers. So she is anxious and she's like, "Oh my God, what's going on? Am I missing something?" And she goes to criticism. Um, and Ray hears the criticism and something in his head goes, "Yeah, you're not my real mother. I always knew that there was going to be this problem in this relationship." Like something gets activated. And he moves away from her, as she gets critical of him, instead of, being loving and supportive as she had been. And he goes looking for ways to feel better, and when young teenagers go looking for ways to feel better, they don't always make the best decisions. He started doing drugs. He also realized around this time that he was attracted to other boys, and really hated the school that he was in. So he began to look for connection that was sexual connection, often with much older men, just get some sense of belonging and positive sense of self. Well, you can imagine this raises Barbara's anxiety even more. She goes from criticism to coercive control, consequences, just makes Ray feel worse. He doesn't wants to have even less to do with her, right? You get the picture. Like with each rotation around this cycle, it gets worse. They're in more and more direct conflict, arguments. He says to her, you just wanted me so you could feel good about yourself and to prove to everybody else what a good person you are because your parents didn't love you and you need that. Like kids, smart kids, he's a smart kid, really know how to get to their parents, and he does. He calls her a racist, he calls her homophobic. Um, and for her, what's getting activated, she keeps it to herself. She keeps it to herself, but then it comes out what gets activated. Oh, I knew you were just like your mother. And this was going to come out at some point, out of control, on drugs, um, like, right? So if you get this couple, this dyad, in your office, you're going to think, wow, these people have a terrible relationship. Um, like, should they even be living in the same home together? And actually, that's the advice that Barbara got. I mean, it got a little scary for her. He started coming home on drugs, bringing men home, strangers. Growing up, he's bigger than her at this point. She's scared. And, the advice that she gets is to send him to wilderness. Gets kidnapped in the middle of the night and schlepped out to Utah. Um, I mean, obviously, an adopted kid who already has a lot of issues about where he fits in the world, to be kidnapped and brought to Utah, was not a particularly therapeutic experience for him. He came back really, really mad. He also came back. He got off drugs when he was there, but he came back so angry at Barbara, and there was so much conflict that that's the point at which I got the case. So again, you see a case like that and you think, why are we, why are we even doing relational work here? Um, but again, the problem in this case didn't even begin with the relationship. It began outside the relationship, and then it becomes about the relationship. And when you see this high level of conflict, we assume this relationship is finished. This relationship is the problem. I should send them each to individual work, so that they can figure out how to engage in a process of self-correction and manage their anger, manage, impulsivity. Maybe then there could be a relationship between the two of them. You don't think to work within the relationship. Um, so again, here's where like the ideas that we hold become so important. Um, I think, if you learn one thing in this workshop, and I hope you learn more than one thing, um, this would be the piece. Um, no matter how it looks, when you're looking at, hearing about a very crisis heavy, crisis laden, conflictual relationship between an adolescent child and their parent or parents, um, don't believe what you see. It's it's a love relationship. It's a love relationship in which the conflict is being generated, as conflicts often are in love relationships, because of hurt and because of feeling unattended to. I always assume that people are looking for each other, especially, I mean, especially when I'm doing parent-child work. Um, I generally come in with that assumption, and even in doing couples work, unless somebody tells me otherwise. Somebody says, no, I'm finished. Okay. But otherwise, I assume that no matter how conflictual it looks, that people are looking for each other, and that, the conflict is being generated because they're looking for each other and protecting themselves at the same time. And then because of that, because there's mechanisms, strategies of self-protection in place. They're looking for each other, and then they meet that strategy of self-protection, and they can't find the other person behind that strategy. Um, so let's keep in mind, adolescents need a close connection with their family. I always get surprised when, I get referrals from a hospital or day treatment program or something, and the referring clinician says, the family in this case is toxic, for the kid, and kid really needs, an individual treatment, so that they can learn how to separate from their family. Um, I always get surprised, when people have that idea. Um, at what point do we stop needing a close connection with our family? Um, you know, that's a rhetorical question. Obviously, the answer is never. We always want a close connection with our family, and it happens sometimes that, in fact, family relationships are dangerous for people, or they're so awful, violent, that separation is the best thing, the only solution. But those are situations that are outliers. Um, Adolescents certainly need a close relationship with their family. We live in a society that stresses separation, even in the best of circumstances, and does not offer a lot of models for how to stay connected. There's a lot of models for how to separate. There's not a lot of models, not a lot of maps for how to stay connected. And adolescents really need to do both. But, if you take a 16-year-old, um, they're a lot closer to six than they are to 30. So, of course they need a connection, even though they may be vocally contemptuous, and even hostile, in their relationship with their parents, and say, I don't care, I don't need this. Um, Parents want to be good parents, and again, like if you met Barbara, who's such a dedicated parent, and you listen to her talk about Ray, and she says about Ray, I did the best I could with him, but he's just a sociopath. I think he's just a really bad person. Um, I think that probably he's a person, and who like society needs to be protected from him. Um, like your reaction to that is like, wow, have I met a mother here who actually actively hates her child? Um, you know, what's going on? Um, but I have a rule of thumb that the extent to which parents are hostile and openly critical of their child is exactly commensurate, with the extent to which their heart is broken in the context of this relationship. And boy, I mean, once I got to know Barbara, boy, was her heart broken. And all of her hostility against Ray was hurt, disappointment, um, and disappointment mainly in herself. It's a lot of self-blame. So parents were also looking for their kids. Um, uh, are there exceptions? Are there parents who are dangerous for their kids for one reason or another? Yes. Um, but those are outliers. Um, I also make this assumption, and this is an assumption that I feel particularly strongly about, that maybe goes a little bit against the grain of some of the things we think about. Um, Remember I said at the beginning, right, that one of the advantages of thinking systemically is that we're asking questions about how do you want the relationship to be and what can you do about it? Proactive questions in which we're encouraging people to think about how they can have positive impact, on their relationships. Kids need that. Um, they need to be able to make their parents happy. This is, um, this is where our self-esteem, I believe, comes from. Our self-esteem, I mean, it's nice to have somebody who loves you, who maybe anticipates your needs, who takes care of you. I mean, we all like that. Um, but and we all need that. But self-esteem comes from the feeling that I have something that will make the person I love smile. That's going to make a difference. That's going to make a positive impact. I make a positive impact on them, then I feel more positive about myself. Um, and, it does go both ways with parents and kids. So adolescents need that. They need that more than ever, right? Because they're trying to figure out their own worth, as they move into adulthood. They have a new ideas about themselves, a new sense of themselves. Um, Sometimes, leads to a lot of internal conflict and questioning. Uh, Parents also need to be taken care of by their kids. I mean, of course, there's appropriate and inappropriate ways for a child to take care of their parent. I would say needless to say, but with inappropriate ways, parents need to be taken care of. I don't think the relationship between parents and kids is sort of is sort of unconditional in that kind of unqualified way. Um, when I mean, little babies, infants get unconditional love because you can't expect anything from them. But when a kid turns about 3 months, 3 months, they develop an ability to smile in response to the gaze of their parents. Their parents warm to that smile, and then the parents and then it begins, right? The parents look for the smile, they get disappointed when they don't see it. And the little baby, wants to give that smile and to see the parental reaction. Like that part of the parent-child feedback mechanism gets activated. So that's actually very important. That's a very important way I think about the work of reconnection um, between uh, between parents and their adolescent kids. Um, so, what are the overall goals of treatment? That I think about. And again, I mean, the every case is a little different. Nobody follows. You can have a lot of maps in your head about the treatment. Nobody's, like clients don't follow those maps. So, you have to have them in your head and be prepared for a lot of detours. Um, Parents get to a place, like, let me just sort of back up 1 second, just in terms of um, how the work kind of unfolds for a little bit, at least initially. So, parents, by the time they come in for family therapy, and I find, and again, because I think that we're so focused, particularly in adolescence, we see the problem as having, we see the problem being around separation. We see the solution in adolescence as having a successful separation and individuation. We don't tend to think so much about the importance of connection. Everybody knows that connection is important, but do we really work in that direction? In my experience, people come to family therapy with their troubled adolescent as I'm maybe the third, maybe the fourth therapist that they've met. They've been to, they've been to individual therapists, cognitive behavioral therapists. They've been to, a psychiatrist. Maybe they've been to some kind of residential program. All right, let's try family therapy. Like things are so bad. So by the time they come to me, like that cycle that I've had up there before, it's gotten pretty escalated, right? It was certainly the case between Barbara and Ray. And, parents have gotten to the point where they're like, um, like they come in, and you say, so what's going on? It's almost always the parent who speaks first. I've been doing this work long enough. I started doing it before I had kids. And I always used to worry about the adolescent's feelings and I'd try to connect with the adolescent. Um, I like adolescents. I don't usually have a problem connecting with them. But when their parents are in the room, especially if they don't know you yet, they shut down, right? So, um, like one of my favorite moments in family therapy is when the parents and the child come in. One of the parents turns to the child and says, "Well, now we're in family therapy, so talk. Tell us what's going on." As though the presence of yet another adult in an authority position is going to um, uh, somehow make this kid want to open up. So I don't advise trying to connect with adolescents first. I mean, if they talk, great, you can go with it. Um, but it's usually the parent who's going to get the ball rolling. And usually what they're going to do is they're going to tell you what the problem is with their child. Um, and they usually have a list, right? It's like, those of you who have kids maybe have experienced this. Those of you who have partners, maybe have experienced. Once you have conflict, and you're feeling hurt and you're feeling unloved, um, it's like everything reminds you that this person who you think should love you isn't loving you. They don't take out the garbage, they put their shoes in the wrong place, they don't make the bed their tone of voice, they don't text you back quickly enough. It's all a reminder, right? That you're not that you're hurt in this relationship. So parents are like that too. They have a long list. Um, so you ask what's wrong, and they'll say he's doing drugs, he's having sex with people, like dangerous sex, bringing these people home. I'm scared of him. His room is a mess. I don't like the clothes that he wears. I don't like the music that he listens to. I don't like the way his tone of voice when he talks to me. This was Barbara's list. Right. So it spans the gamut from stuff that's like, wow, that's going on to like, oh, well, you're complaining about that. Um, it's all on the same level, and the adolescent is listening to this, and the adolescent is thinking, I'm never going to be able to have a relationship with you unless I get a personality transplant. And I'm not going to do that. So forget you. I don't care. Right? Like I'm out of here. Uh, Parents need to lower the bar. And I'll talk about how you engage parents and help them lower the bar um, with regard to what the adolescent needs to do in order to re-enter the relationship. Like, not everything can be on the list. They have to give the adolescent a chance to do something that can be a gesture towards re-entering the relationship. Adolescents who are saying, I don't care, um, and who are checking out of the relationship, um, need to show that they care about the relationship. There also needs to be problem solving around the presenting issue, right? If the presenting issue is drugs, you have to be able to help with that. Sometimes, family therapy doesn't solve all problems. Sometimes that requires separate treatment. If the problem is kid isn't going to school, the conversations have to be centered around getting the kid to go back to school. Um, Relational hierarchy needs to be reestablished. Let me just take a second to talk about what I mean by that. Um, I said parent-child relationships are reciprocal. They're not symmetrical, right? Parents should be taking care of kids more than kids are taking care of parents if it goes well. Um, until you get parents maybe who are less able if they get older, but that's long past adolescence. Um, when there's adolescent conflict, Parents don't know what to do for their kids. They lose the ability to figure out how to take care of them. Um, they try to take care of them through those coercive control and critical strategies. And the kid gets power because, the parent says, you must, you should, here are consequences. And it's all ineffectual. All the parent has to do is say, all the kid has to do is say, I don't care, I'm not listening to you. And the kid wins, right? So relational hierarchy is gone. Relational hierarchy means the parent is more so taking care of the kid than the other way around. And instead, the kid gets power, which drives the parent crazy and the kid can't really handle. So we have to find ways of reestablishing the relational hierarchy. Um, so I am, so those are my overall goals that I have in mind. Um, what I'm going to do now, um, I'm going to run through some very specific questions and strategies that I have, that first Peggy and I developed. Um, we developed these strategies. What we did was we saw families, adolescents with their parents in Ackerman. We have a one-way mirror. Um, One of us would be the therapist, the other would be sitting inside of the mirror. We would tape the sessions, and um, and we would then look over the tapes, and when one of us did something that we thought worked, we'd write it down, and then we would try to do it again on purpose and see if it worked the second time. And over time, we kind of distilled certain questions that seem to have pretty good efficacy. Um, I came from a background working in preventive service. I was really interested in systemic relational interventions where you didn't have a lot of where there was a lot of crisis and you didn't really have a lot of time. So this approach really appealed to me. Um, so you could work quickly and really get somewhere relationally. So I'm going to kind of divide these two artificially because you don't first talk to the adolescent and then to the parent. In fact, usually like I said, you're talking to the parent first. Um, but uh, talking to parents is more difficult than talking to adolescents usually. So I'll just run through the adolescent stuff first, and then we'll talk about talking to parents. Um, so I think I'm going to use this case just to illustrate. It's a different case, just to illustrate how these questions function. Um, so this is a case. This is also a single mother with her son, but it's a divorced family. Um, there's three kids, um, girl, boy, boy. And the kid who's in question is the middle son. Let's call him Sam. Um, and we'll call the mother Monique. Um, Monique is from another country. She moved here when she was very young. She had a very conflictual relationship with her own mother. Uh, got out of there, and she was still a teenager when she came to this country. She met eventually, and married Bob, call him. Um, Bob is, Monique became a school teacher. Eventually, Bob is a musician. And as she began having kids, she began to long. I should also mention it's a mixed race couple. Monique is white. Bob is African American. Um, and the differences between the parents have become important in the case. So she began to, actually, as the kids began to have kids and the kids got older, she began to long for more of a connection with her culture and her family. And she convinced Bob to move to the country where she's from. Let's say it's Belgium, and and to live there. Bob was very reluctant. He didn't speak the language. He felt out of place. Um, he found the country and the town that they were living in to be very racist. He couldn't play his music. He was very unhappy. He said, "If we don't go back home, I'm going to divorce you." She said, "Okay, we'll go back home to New York." And he divorced her anyway. Very acrimonious divorce. Um, Bob is a musician. He tours a lot. He tries to be present when he can. But just the way things worked out, Monique is really raising these kids a lot on her own. Uh, and still longing for this connection, feeling very out of place, feeling very isolated, feeling very uncertain of herself as a mother, very anxious. She gets the idea when her daughter reaches um, teenage years that she's going to send her daughter to live for a year um, to be with her parents in Belgium. They speak French. Um, and um, that works out pretty well for the daughter. The subtext is be close to me, right? Don't be close to your father. Be European, don't be African American, speak French, don't speak English, right? And of course, it's a little bit of an impossible demand. They're growing up in this country. Um, they're mixed race. They don't look white. And, they want a connection with their father. But the daughter does okay with it. She comes back speaking fluent French. The mother's very happy. Um, so Sam's a pretty angry kid. He's a middle child. He already feels very in the middle between the two parents. A lot of loyalty divides. He's very, very attached to his father, very identified with his father, very angry at his mother, and pushes against her, looking for a closer relationship with the father. Um, this is a case in which I would say that a lot of the problems do emerge from dynamics in the family. Um, and so she sends him to live with her parents in in Belgium. He's already angry, doesn't want to go. There's a lot of conflict between them. He's not doing well in school. He's like 13, 14. He comes back so mad at her. He's now 15, goes into 16. He starts getting into drugs. He gets into more conflict, more and more conflict with her, won't obey curfew, comes home whenever he feels like coming home. Um, he, at one point, um, disenrolls himself from the high school by forging her signature and enrolls himself in a different high school and then won't tell her where he's going to school. That's the extent of the alienation between the two of them. Spends as much time with the father as he can, um, but also is engaging in more and more sort of antisocial behavior, I guess, criminal behavior. He's selling drugs. He gets into fights. He gets picked up by the police. He gets mandated for all kinds of treatment, including family treatment. Um, and that's when I get the case. Again, like the conflict is um, so intense. When I talk to adolescents, like a lot of people are afraid of adolescents. I feel like people either love adolescents or they don't love adolescents. If you don't like adolescents, you shouldn't work with them, is my thought. Like if you like them, then you probably already know how to work with them. Um, but What I always think about when I think about working with adolescents individually or in family therapy, I think they have an adult brain. This is the problem. Their brains are more or less just like yours and mine. They just don't know how to use them. And so a lot of, and because they don't know how to use their brains, sometimes they do stupid things. And when they do stupid things, what happens is that adults take out their index finger and they say to them, "What are you, stupid? Don't you know blah, 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 blah?" And they give them a lecture. And that doesn't helpful. Like when kids get lectures from adults, well-meaning adults, what they hear is blah, 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 blah. This adult thinks I'm a bad kid. I'm not interested in being told that I'm a bad kid. When is this over? Uh, it doesn't do much good. What we really want to do in talking to adolescents is that we want to turn brain functions on, um, so that they can begin to think for themselves about who and what they want to be. Um, so these are, these are some of the reason, awareness, and understanding of emotions. Um, One of the things that is different in adolescence, I think I've already pretty much alluded to this. Um, Adolescents all of a sudden have like new pleasures in life, like social life, like sex, like drugs, like independence. It's all really exciting and intoxicating. And they're really taken up with these new pleasures. Um, so much so that they really don't pay, like there's so much paying attention to these new pleasures that they are paying much less attention to any of the negative consequences that come from the new pleasures, right? So, people look at the adolescent and they say, "What are you, stupid?" And if the real answer is no, they're not stupid. They're just thinking so much about where the pleasure is going to come from that they're not thinking about the consequences of their actions. And it's important to keep in mind because that's why lectures don't work, and that's why negative consequences don't work. They're not thinking, they're not paying attention to the negative consequences, right? So if you give an adolescent a negative consequence, um, they're just going to be like, "Oh, this sucks. Where's the fun?" That's the attitude. That's not universally true. But the worse the relationship between parents and kids, I think the more that becomes true. Um, I mean, I have nothing against giving adolescents consequences. If it works, great. If it doesn't work, it's really frustrating for parents and it makes the relationship worse. Um, that's maybe a useful thing to keep in mind. I try to explain that to parents who are feeling very frustrated and very helpless because they can't find the right consequences to get through to their kid. Um, so I divide the questions that I ask adolescents into two categories. Um, One I call self-assessment questions, and the other I call relational questions. Relational responsibility. Remember that slide from a few minutes ago, where I talk about how important it is for adolescents to have positive impact. Um, so self-assessment questions mainly revolve around the question, how do you think you're doing? Um, which, when you hear that question, it sounds like a pretty good question, right? To ask an adolescent. But I'm always surprised at how infrequently that question gets asked because people are so busy trying to correct the adolescent behavior. Which, granted, you get a kid like Sam who's engaged in some pretty scary stuff, like he's seriously at risk. Um, you want to correct him. But the thing is, like, if he's a danger to himself or others, then you need to control him, which is different than correcting him. And he needs to be in a controlled environment. And if you want to like get him to think about himself and maybe change his behavior, then trying to correct him is not going to help. So I like this framing of the question because um, it names what's going on the ground. Everybody's worried about this kid. Are you worried about yourself? Um, if self-assessment questions work, it's great, right? Because the kid says, "Oh, I think come to think of it, I'm not going to school and I kind of want to go to college. So yeah, I guess I am." Like you actually can sometimes see the light bulb go metaphorically going on, like lighting above their heads. Like, oh, that is a problem. Never really thought about it. I was so busy looking for fun. Um, and when that happens, you can talk about, all right, so how are you going to self-correct? What's your corrective action plan? Like, what are you going to make different about it? What kind of help do you need from your parents? You can develop a plan that the parents kind of get involved with. You get into the relational stuff. The kid says, I don't want my parents' help. They're just always critical. Oh, okay. So let's talk about, like how the relationship can change so that they're actually what would actually feel supportive instead of critical. And, we becomes a vehicle for working on the relationship. Um, I hope I'm not going through that too quickly. In other words, we're working together. Where are the obstacles in working together? Oh, that gives us a vehicle for reconnecting the relationship right there. Um, I always ask the kid to come up with the plan. Kids usually try to follow their plan, right? A kid will say, um, I am planning on I'll go to school on Monday, and we're all scratching our heads because you haven't been to school in 3 months. But I'll say, all right, that sounds like a good plan. Might be hard to change behavior. Let's see if it works. And if it doesn't work, which it probably won't, I don't say this part out loud, but I do say if it doesn't work, can we come back and talk about it, how we're going to tweak it? And when it doesn't work, come back and we talk about it. And we talk about what kind of help you want from your parents. I don't want any help from my parents. They're way too critical. Okay, let's work on the relationship. Like, we go like that. Um, so um, basically, I think you'll get the slides. You can look through these. Um, if so, when I asked Sam, first of all, Sam refuses to come in with his mother, hates his mother. I won't sit in a room, and he calls her a very ugly word, and which certain things are out of bounds in my treatment space. And I tell him that we don't use that language. Um, uh, I won't sit with her. I mean, take people as they are. So um, he comes in by himself. I say, "How are things going with his mother?" He says, "Who are you talking about? I don't have a mother." Right? Like that's where he's at. Um, when I ask him, people seem to be worried about you. Are you worried about yourself? I mean, that question works, I would say about 65% of the time. It's always worth a shot. It's definitely not, it's not a guaranteed kind of question. With Sam, like he's like full on into I'm so tough, I'm so cool, nobody can touch me. I don't care mode, right? Like I'm not looking for any love or support from anybody because I don't think I'm going to get it. So I am just off on my own and I don't need you anyway. He's in that mode. So he says, um, I'm not worried about myself. I don't know why, I don't know why people worry about it. Nobody needs to worry about me. So the follow-up question to that is always, so tell me, help me understand, like, because people look at you, your mother looks at you, your father, who is also worried, looks at you, um, your probation officer looks at you. We all look at you. I look at you. I listen to what you've been up to, and we're all worried. So what are we getting? What are we not getting here? Like, why are we worried and you're not worried? And he says, he's tough, says, well, um, I got it covered. I'm all right. You know, if I go to jail, I go to jail. I go with a lot of people who have gone to jail. So what? Right? Like he takes that stance. Okay, so that question strikes out. Uh, sometimes you can get kids to say, well, um, they shouldn't worry about me because I'm about to go back to school or something like that. So you can start to develop, again, that plan that way. But not with Sam. Sam's too detached. Um, so then if I strike out on that, or even if I don't strike out on that, I go to the relational responsibility questions. And this is about getting kids to say, yes, I care about the relationship. And yes, I am willing to do something to demonstrate my care about the relationship. Remember, it's like parents need to lower the bar, the adolescent needs to step over the bar. Of those two things, um, getting the adolescent to step over the bar is far and away the easier of those two tasks. Given half a chance of opportunity, adolescents will say, yeah, I want a relationship. I'm willing to work for the relationship. Absolutely. Um, Parents will come in and they will say, of course, I want a better relationship and I'm willing to do something. I'm willing to do anything um, to improve my relationship with my kid. Of course, they will say that and they mean it when they say it. And then when you try to get them to do something, they fold their arms and they go, I don't know. I don't know. Because they're so hurt. And I'll talk about this more when we talk about parents. Like I said, when I first started to do this work, I always used to worry about the vulnerability of the adolescent. That's like this person is a kid, they don't have a voice, they're not as articulate. Um, and I mean, of course, we should always be worried about the welfare of children, but in the relational dynamics, um, it is the parent who is way more vulnerable, who loses sense of self, who loses um, relational efficacy, who feels beaten down in the relationship, way more than the adolescent. Um, the adolescent goes looking for fun and gets into all kinds of trouble, feels lonely and confused on the inside, but finds external ways of coping with it. Um, and um, the parent ends up bereft and helpless. Plus, which, if you are um, old enough to be the parent of an adolescent child, you're old enough to have had some knocks in life. And this hurt goes just right into that same folder. Yet another person, right? Goes right into that same folder. It certainly did for Monique with Sam. Um, I should just mention, and maybe we can talk about this a little bit later on if we have time. I'm talking about what sometimes get called externalizing kids, kids who, when they are in distress, um, act out. Like they do drugs, they don't go to school, they get into trouble with the law, they um, have risky sex, they do all kinds of stuff like that. Um, there's a whole other class of adolescents, which we sometimes call internalizing kids, who are in just as much pain and feel just as much isolation, who tend towards depression, who tend towards closing in on themselves and withdrawal. Um, I can say some more about those kids towards the end. Often they don't come to our attention, right? Because sometimes often they're very good kids. They're internally suffering. And a lot of those kids, we'll see them in their early 20s when they're having a hard time launching. Or we'll see them in their teenage years if it's really serious and they're not able to get out of the house and go to school, or they get so depressed that, they start engaging in self-injurious behaviors. Um, uh, they are not what I like to call affectionately the I don't care kids, right? Like Sam. The I don't care kids are kids who are like, I am not taking on your anxiety, mom and dad. So instead of caring about your anxiety, I'm not going to care about the relationship at all. Um, and so they act out, right? Like one of the best ways of enacting not caring is to do the very thing that your parents care about the most. Um, Sam, I mean, he loves his father, and I met his father, and his father was part of the treatment. I'm not going to talk about that so much. Just in the interests of time. But he's also like affiliating with his father and saying, if you ask him, what race are you? He'll say African American, like identifying with his father because he's sticking his finger in his mother's eye because she's so anxious and she so much needs him and he doesn't want to take it on, right? He does not want to take it on. Uh, so he won't care. Do not mistake expressions on the part, right? Sam is 16 and a half, almost 17 when they come to see me. Um, and boy, does he not care. Don't get fooled, right? Kids who say they don't care and who enact not caring and seem hell-bent on hurting their parents um, care. And sometimes they care so much that they can't handle it. And so they have to defend themselves from their own care by not caring. Um, so if you ask Sam this question, like this seems like a high risk question. And at this point, by the time I ask him this question, you really want to ask this question with everybody in the room, right? Because you want the parent to hear the answer to this question. That's really an important part, that the parent hears the answer to this question. Because it seems like a high risk question. It seems like Sam is going to curse and say something horrible about his mother and profess not caring. Um, in reaction to this question. But if the self-assessment questions have a 65% success rate, I haven't actually kept track of this, so I'm making these numbers up just to be clear. Um, but if the self-assessment questions have a 65% success rate, this question has a 95% success rate or higher. I've met very few kids who don't respond positively to this question, who don't say, in answer to this question, of course, I'm worried about my parent. And that's exactly what Sam says. Of course, I'm worried about her. I mean, look at her, right? I mean, he doesn't say it nicely, but he says it. Of course, I'm worried about her. I mean, look at her. She's a mess. She's a wreck. Like I worry about what is going on with her at home all the time. I think she needs to get a boyfriend. Right? She's like way too much concerned with me. Um, all right. I mean, like you can pay attention to his tone of voice and some of the nasty things that he says, or you can pay attention to the fact that he just said that he cares about his mother. This is a low risk question, actually, because of course adolescents care about their parents. They're kids. We all care about our parents. It takes a lot to happen. I mean, a parent can do stuff so that a kid doesn't worry about them anymore and it just cuts off. But it takes a lot for that to happen. It takes a long time and it takes a lot for a kid to get to that point. And those are outliers. Um, Sam cares about his mother. He worries about her. Does not want to take it on. Um, but once you get the positive answer to this question, you can begin to develop, articulate um, relational responsibility. And again, like you have to remember in talking to kids, even older adolescents like Sam, you know, it's not like parents make this mistake all the time. They think, my kid isn't talking to me about his feelings. He's not telling me things. Um, and he's hiding things from me. Usually when you ask a kid, so how does that make you feel? And they say, I don't know. What they really mean is, I don't know. They have no idea. They have no idea what they feel. They don't know what the words are to describe that feeling if they do recognize they have a feeling at all. Probably true more for boys than the girls, just the way boys are socialized around emotional development. Um, so, like I'm asking these questions of somebody who has never thought about any of this before. Sam's never asked himself if he worries about his mother. He didn't think about that until I asked him that question. So, we can, like give a fair, healthy dose of leeway around the nastiness, around, not saying it right. He said it, and you can keep going. Um, do you worry about how much she worries? I usually ask, what do you worry about when you worry about her? Do you worry about, uh, how much she worries about? I worry about how, of course, I worry about how much she worries about her. That's where he says, he worries too much. She should get a boyfriend. Um, what do you do? Of course, Sam does nothing. Um, and he says, well, I'm not going to do anything. That's not my job to take care of my mother, which, yes and no. Um, but again, like I want to leave this conversation um, with a plan for behavior change. Um, and when I worked with Peggy, I've gotten sloppy with this, since I stopped working with her. But we always used to ask at the end of every session, "What's one thing that you're going to go differently based on our conversation today?" Um, I always think, especially in family work, you got to operationalize it. Like they're going to go home and they're going to keep doing the same thing that they were doing right before the session. Even if the session is a fantastic session with all of these breakthroughs and blah, 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 it's all going to get erased unless you can operationalize it. So, you have to ask the question, what's one thing you're going to do differently based on our conversation today? Write it down. When they come back, ask them if they did it. If they didn't do it, what got in the way? Scared. I don't think she's even going to notice if I do something different, right? Like, if they didn't do it, that's fine. There's a reason. Let's talk about the reason. Um, so I'm always looking for action. Um, uh, I'm always looking for action. This is the act, and so this is the question. And I want the kid to come up with the plan, not me, certainly not the parent. Um, if you knew it would work, would you be willing to do something? The wording here is very specific. If you knew it would work, right? Because a kid like Sam has given up on anything working. If you knew it would work, hypothetically, would you be willing to do something? Not would you actually do it, but would you be willing to help your parents worry less? It's it's like a softball question, right? Like, say yes, you're not committing to anything. So he says, yeah, I guess. I mean, I don't think anything's going to work, but sure, why not? What ideas do you have to help them worry even a little bit less? And Sam thinks about it. He actually thinks about it, because he does want his mother to worry less. And he says, well, she has this ridiculous curfew for me. Supposed to be home at 11:30. And at this point he's coming home whenever he wants to. Um, next morning, next day. So I'm not going to come home at 11:30 or anything like that. But I am willing, if I'm not coming home at 11:30, I'm willing to text her and let her know that I'm alive. And of course, Monique looks at him and she's like, "What? I mean, that's not enough. That's nothing, right? Like if this kid is at this point involved with the criminal justice system. He's at risk for being sent away. Um, it's pretty serious. And this is the behavioral change that he's willing to make. It's a very small drop in a big problem bucket. Um, so I have to say to Monique, um, of course it's not enough, but it's something, and it's something that he's doing for you. So I hope that I think he'll do this. I say that in front of him. I really think he'll do this. Um, and when he does this, I hope that let it make a difference to you. And, and he does do it, not consistently, but he does it half the time, which is a lot better than what he was doing, right? And when he does it, uh, she says, "Thank you, merci." And then she says, "You're supposed to be home now." And he types back, "Whatever." And that's how it goes. It's not a lot, but like, how much has this relationship changed now that Sam is actually doing something? He is doing something that like, he's looking to have impact in the world by getting involved in all kinds of nonsense. And now he's experiencing some positive impact in his relationship with his mother. It's a step. You have to really help the mother here accept, baby steps, partial steps, not enough steps, which, is its own piece of work that you have to do with her agony, her frustration, her deep fear, her hurt. Um, but it builds on itself. She wants to have these long lunches on the weekend. Um, and he starts to show up sometimes, right? And when he shows up, like sometimes he tells her what's going on. Um, and like they actually start to have a relationship. He experiences, I do this. My mother actually is responding positively. I have to help her a lot with that. The responding positively part, she needs a lot of help, support, encouragement. Um, and so that, like he steps over the bar and back into the relationship. Um, and I mean, look, I wish I could wrap this case up in a bow and say, and they all lived happily ever after. Um, he got picked up by the police again for threatening somebody with a fork, some craziness, and he got sent away. And but he got when he got sent away, I stayed in touch with the mother. She visited him. They kept a relationship. And when he came back home to live with her. He lived with her. Um, and he had a place to go, right? Like, how much better is this kid's prognosis for how he's going to do in life? Does the relationship solve all the problems? Sometimes it does. Sometimes it solves a lot of the externalizing problems. Um, but in the long run, it did because the relationship got better. I mean, look, it's not rocket science, right? We all do better when we feel loved by the people that we love. Um, that's not an abstract or complicated concept. I don't think. Um, all right. Why don't we it's 1:35. Why don't we take 5-minute break? I know it's hard to just sit and listen to Zoom presentation. So let's just take 5 minutes and we'll come back and we'll talk about talking to parents.
Great. Thanks, everyone. We'll be see everybody at 1:40.
Okay. Um, Hope everybody's back. So working with parents. I said before, I mean, I don't know if this is really true, but I do sort of have a feeling that um, people generally either really like working with adolescents. Um, I've always liked working with adolescents. Um, and or people really don't particularly like adolescents. And I think if you don't like working with adolescents, then you probably just shouldn't work with them because they're hard. They're, like they're frustrating. Um, and if you like them, it's really rewarding. Um, you know, but even if you like working with adolescents parents is pretty difficult across the board, I think, um, for a lot of people. And I would say that I probably didn't really get good at working with parents of adolescents until I had kids. Didn't take until my kids were adolescents. Um, Gives you some sense of how old I am and how long I've been doing this work, because I started before I had kids and now my kids are no longer adolescents. Um, but it's hard. I mean, it's hard to work with parents of adolescents. Um, and that's because it's hard to be a parent of an adolescent. My kids always used to say when they were adolescents, one of the ways they poked their fingers in my eye, we were having a fight, they would say, and you're supposed to be an expert in adolescence. Um, it's hard to, and it's hard for a reason. Um, it goes back to what I was saying before that, we have only had a few tries at parenting adolescents culturally. And there's a lot of cultures that still like, you talk to people and they're like, wait a minute, in your culture, like there's this period of time where kids are allowed and even expected to disrespect their parents. Um, uh, what? Like that's absolutely nuts. Like we don't do that in our culture. And my response, my honest response is, yeah, I mean, I kind of agree with you. It's a really bad idea. I think, maybe adolescence is a really bad idea. Um, but that's not something we're going to change. Um, so, it's easy to have um, a judgment for parents. Like if you listen to Barbara or if you listen to Monique, how harshly critical, how shrill, how anxious, how controlling they are, their adolescent kids. It's easy to be judgmental. It's easy to look at Sam and think, and then look at the mother and think, you look like a nice woman. How can you screwed your kid up so much? What went on here? It's really easy to judge. And and I think that judgment in particular falls on like the less sort of social capital a parent has, socioeconomic, immigration status, race. The more like in some sense, the harder it is to parent because there are fewer resources and less social power. The more they get blamed, is been my experience for it of it. But you know, I and I think that's a lot of reasons why it's hard to work with parents. By the time they come in to see us, they feel blamed. First of all, you always blame yourself if you're a parent and your kid's not doing well. That's just downloaded into your parenting brain when your kids are born. Guilt, self-criticism. Um, but then parents are blamed. They actually are. They're blamed by everybody, friends, relatives, implicitly, covertly, overtly, by therapists. And they're sent to parenting classes to get to be monitored and engage in a program of self-correction, which makes them feel worse and more all alone. Um, not that there's not some benefit in parenting classes, but I'll talk more about this in a second. So they come in expecting to be judged, prickly, defensive, and a lot of them don't want to come in. A lot of them, that have what I call the fix my kid syndrome. Well, they'll like drop off their kid like you would your like like if you're dropping off your broken computer or something at a repair shop, say, can you fix this thing for me? I'll come back tomorrow. Um, and don't want to have anything to do with the treatment. Um, Again, like a parent who does not want to have anything to do with helping their kid to be better, is a parent who is deeply hurt and demoralized, right? Like that is a parent in pain, and they get misread as a parent who doesn't care. Which, if you enter into a conversation with a parent um, from that place, I guarantee you that you will not have a good relationship with that parent. Um, if you assume that they do care, but they're in so much pain that they can't bring themselves into the room, um, then then maybe you have a chance. So the goals I'm talking to parents, lowering parental frustration and helplessness. You could just say reactivity in general. Um, Helping parents understand their adolescent children. Like again, like this has to do so much with reactivity, right? When we get reactive in our relationships, we stop thinking about the interiority of the people who we are reacting to. Um, like um, all we think about is the hurt that they're causing us, and we don't think about why they're doing what they're doing, and where that might come from. And the most important goal is we have to help parents find new ways to have positive impact. Because when parents feel like, I don't know what to do for my kid, um, that's like one of the worst feelings in the world. Um, this goes to like that concept I talked about before, relational hierarchy. Um, like, how do I get back this feeling? Like this kid used to rely on me to stay alive, and now I don't know where they are at night. How do I get back a feeling that I have something meaningful to offer them? Um, uh, you know, Parents are not going to feel good about stepping into the relationship until they get that. Um, Two things not to do with parents. Um, uh, Joining parents in their criticism of their adolescent child. Um, that's their kid. Don't criticize their kid. They're allowed to, you're not, period. Like you will not join with a parent in saying, yeah, your kid really is, it really is a crappy kid you got there. You can say um, uh, that I can see how much of a struggle this is for you. You can empathize. You can see, wow, yeah, you really got it hard. She's really putting you through your paces there. It's pretty challenging. You can say that, but you can't say, yeah, your kid, oof, that's one bad kid you got there. Um, Nobody likes it when you insult their children. The first one is a little bit trickier. Because parents will come in, engage, like they'll engage you. They'll like say, I want to see you. I'm helpless and lost and I don't know what to do. Please tell me what to do. I just really want to know how to help my child. Um, this is a trap. Um, Parents do not want parenting advice because if you give them parenting advice, what you're doing in your relationship with the parent is you're putting yourself above them. You're saying to them, yeah, you don't know how to raise your kids, but I do. Um, right? I mean, of course, nobody's going to say it like that or with that tone of voice. But I mean, it is what it is. You give people advice who don't know what they're doing. And it's given by experts who know better. And it doesn't make parents feel good. And they will disengage around that. Or they'll say to you, yeah, I tried that, it doesn't work. Or they will leave and come back, or they'll leave and not come back, or they'll leave and they'll come back. And they'll say, yeah, that parenting advice you gave me last week, I tried it, it doesn't work. They, in some level, want it not to work. And, like, I don't blame them. They want to be the parent. They need to be the parent, not you. Um, if you um, if you want to find a nice, nifty way of getting yourself out of this trap, what I do is I say, whatever the problem you're having with your kid, my kid is stealing cars. Um, why don't you Google? This doesn't work so much anymore because now you have this AI summary that comes up first, but you have to look past the AI summary. Why don't you Google, what do I do when my kid is stealing cars? And I guarantee you, um, if you scroll down, there are 30 different things that you're going to get experts who are going to tell you, like, this is what you do. If your kid is stealing cars, do this, 5 steps. And they're all going to be different. They're all going to be different things. And the reason why that is because nobody knows what to do for adolescents, particularly when they get into trouble with themselves and they get into trouble with their parents. It's new. We're all making it up as we go along. So, I mean, I could sit here and give you all kinds of advice, but what I really want to know is what kind of parent do you want to be? This is at the key, this is at the core of what it is to engage, what you need to be able to do to engage parents. I want to know what kind of parent do you want to be? And I want to understand that. And then maybe you and I can have a conversation about how to be that, right? Because when I do that, I'm saying you're a good parent. I'm saying your heart's in the right place. I'm saying the problem is in the execution, perhaps, not in the parenting, if that makes sense. I think I've already said all that. Um, so, breaking this down a little bit, um, parents come in. I said, like they usually speak first. I used to be like, stop the list. That's such a long list of your complaints, and you're saying it in front of your kid. And, like whatever the parent is saying in front of you, 100% certain it's worse at home. The kid isn't hearing anything that they haven't already heard, and a lot more than that. So, let them say it in front of you, in front of the kid. It's okay. You actually really need to make sure the parent feels heard, because if the parent doesn't feel heard, they're going to check out. So instead of stopping the list, I say, what else is on the list? Give me everything. You know, the drugs, the not going to school, she's pregnant. I don't like the way she wears her pants, the room's messy, right? The big stuff, the small stuff, the petty stuff, the stuff that every parent of an adolescent has to go through, the stuff that is really big and problematic. Let me hear all of it. Um, and then I say one thing. Actually, I don't have this on here, but this is perhaps the most important intervention with parents. I didn't write it down. I say to them, wow, it's a really long list. Um, you must be really worried about your child. Uh, that might seem like a small thing, but it's actually a big thing. It's a big thing in two ways. Like a parent who's been deeply hurt, they've shut off care. It's too and now it's just all criticism. And what I'm saying to them is, I see the care, right? I see inside that long list, I see the worry and care. Um, and what happens when you do that is that the parent relaxes because what you're saying to them is, I hear all this harsh criticism you have of your kids, but I recognize you as a parent. And they've stopped feeling like a parent. And one of the ways that they've stopped feeling like a parent is that they've come to a place where they still love their kid, but they don't like them anymore. And that's when you get this long list of complaints. And you're saying, I see you as a parent, and that just completely shifts the way they feel in the room. Um, the kid is there and they have to hear this. They're like, what? You're worried about me? You care about me? I thought you hated me. I thought you didn't. I thought I have to. I'm here thinking I have to get a personality transplant to be in this relationship with you, and I don't know how to do that. Um, so it really shifts things. I mean, it's not magic, but it really shifts things. The next question I ask, I say, okay, that's a really long list. You must be really worried about your kid. What on the list worries you the most? Um, and um, that has the consequence. Like what that does is usually, I don't hear messy room. I don't hear the music's too loud, or I don't like the music. I don't hear about fashion. Um, I hear about something that's really to worry about. And that's engaging. That actually brings, first of all, it's like, all right, let's talk about that. And now we have something to talk about, something to specific. It feels more parental to the parent to be worrying about something real rather than all this other petty stuff. And also the kid is like, all right, I guess I can wonder, I can't understand or I dismiss, like your ideas about the clothes that I'm wearing because you're old, like you know nothing about fashion. So why am I going to listen to you around that? But if you're worried about me doing too many drugs, I may disagree with you, but I can understand why that's something to worry about. Like they come back into the room a little bit because they don't just feel like it's all just criticism. Um, and you're learning something about the parent, right? Why is that and I ask, why is that the thing that worries you? All right, I really want to get into the parent's concern. Um, sometimes you get unusual answers to this question. Um, I was working with a family. It was there was like four kids in this family, but they brought in one of the middle kids, a boy. He was like 14 years old. He wasn't going to school. This was an internalizing kid. Uh, he wasn't going to school. He was depressed. Um, and the father was, would yell at him, yell at him, yell at him. It was a Mexican American family. Yell at him, yell at him. You have to go to school. You have to go to school. The kid would lock himself in it was like, so it was conflict every morning. It was creating parental conflict because the mother would protect while the father was harsh. And I asked the father, I said, like, so in the list of concerns, not going to school, playing too much video games, getting into fights, having no friends, um, stuff, that was to worry about. I can understand. I said, what's the thing that worries you the most? And the father said something he didn't even put on the list first. He said, what worries me the most is that this is a kid who won't play soccer. Um, and I mean, that was a surprise. Um, but there's something up there, right? Like you're learning something about the parent, and who this parent um, wants to uh, um, wants to be. you know, like what he like, something somehow like that for this father would mean something about his own success, right, in parenting. If he had a kid who wanted to play soccer, I'll tell you more about the case in a second. Um, Sometimes, like you ask, like I had a I don't care kid. Um, this was back some years ago. I used to have an office in the East Village, and there were a lot of parents like who had moved to the East Village in the 60s and the 70s. They were really into, drugs and rock and roll, and had stopped doing the drugs, maybe mostly, and had their kids there, stayed in the neighborhood. And so I'd get a lot of cases with them and their kids. And this was a father who had been an IV drug user on the streets in the East Village in the 70s and 80s. I don't know how many of you were old enough to remember those days in New York. It was a different city back then. And mother died of an overdose. He was raising two kids, two sons on his own, hyper vigilant, so scared that these kids are going to do drugs, and so anxious, right? The older son is like, I'm not taking it on. I'm not taking it on. I'm not telling you where I'm going. I'm not telling you who I'm hanging out with. And, he was arrested 16 years old for smoking a joint in front of the Ninth Precinct on East Fifth Street. You might as well be holding a sign up that said, Dad, I don't care, right? Like that's the effect that it had. Um, so you ask a father like that, what worries you the most? Well, duh. Like that worries me. And then, you ask the follow-up question, what is it about that worries you? It sounds like a stupid question. Um, it's actually not a stupid question. Um, but sometimes you have to say, this may sound like a stupid question, but what worries you the most? Because the truth is that different parents are going to be worried about different things, and they're going to get reactive in different ways for different reasons. There's two things I want to help parents with. One is I call the meaning of the system. It's really the symptom. It's really about reactivity, helping parents um, manage their reactivity to their kids' provocative behavior, their kids' problematic behavior. It is a terrible feeling to get reactive to your kids. We all do it. It's always humiliating to get reactive to your kid's behavior, like lose control over your own emotions in front of your children. Um, it's it's life as it is in one of its worst moments. Um, and so you need to be able to help parents manage their reactivity. It makes the relationship better. It's also help that parents want. But before can do that, you have to understand the reactivity. Um, why is this father getting so upset because his son is not going to play soccer? Um, well, I mean, I say, wow, you're getting really upset, about your son not playing soccer and first of all, my first thought about that is it must feel horrible to get that upset at your son about soccer. And, like, I'm wondering, would it feel better if you didn't get so upset about that? He was like, yeah, it's like crazy. And the second thing is, there must be a reason. Like somehow you've come up with the idea that this is something that's really important. And I'm sure there's a good reason for that. And I am sure there's a good reason for that. Can you tell me what that good reason is? And he thinks about it for a second and he says, well, I grew up in a really small town in rural Mexico. We had no money. I couldn't go to school. stay home. I had to work on the farm. I had to help with the animals, um, and the farming. And we were working all the time, just trying to make ends meet. And I never got a chance to play soccer. And I got out of there. I left, came across the border. I had no papers. Um, I was, I don't even want to tell you about what I had to go through. Finally, I made my way to New York, got married. He married a Mexican woman who was living here, um, established himself. Uh, got papers, got a good job. But it was hard. Like he had to work really hard. And the thing that was going to make all of that okay for him, all of the loss, homeland of his family, all of the sacrifice, was going to make it okay is he's going to have a son who plays soccer. All right. Now I understand. I mean, like that's such a moving story, I say to him. You really want your son to have kind of opportunity and happiness in life that you couldn't have growing up, and that's beautiful, right? Um, so can I talk to you about how, like maybe you can like what you're like now that we understand what you're reacting to there, can we talk about ways for not being so reactive? And sometimes like that's just like emotion regulation stuff. Um, and some of this, I mean, a lot of these conversations, by the way, I'm having without the kid in the room. This particular conversation I had with the kid in the room, it felt fine. That's a clinical decision. I can talk about how you make that decision, if you'd like. But um, so that's one piece. The father, um, I asked him, what's what is the worst thing? Well, he's doing drugs, my worst nightmare. Um, and then I asked him, I said, this may seem like a stupid question, but what is it about him doing drugs that um, bothers you so much? I mean, and I don't mean that it shouldn't bother you. What I actually mean by that is there's so many different things that could um, uh, bother, that could upset, that could worry you about the fact that your kid is doing drugs. I want to know which one is the thing that bothers you the most. What I'm trying to drill down into there is what I call it a parenting mission. I have this idea. I don't really I don't really know that it's right, but I find it a useful idea nonetheless, so I use it. That every parent comes into the project of parenting um, with something that they really want to do for their kids. Um, like, and like if I feel good about my parenting, I feel good about myself with my parent, my kid is going to get this from me. Could be something that they didn't get in their own growing up, right? So Barbara, she didn't feel love and support from her parents. They were never interested in what she was doing. She's going to be super hands-on now with Ray. Uh, and she's going to be so connected and so loving and so supported. And he's going to feel so loved and so supported. The father whose son wouldn't play soccer, um, you know, he, he's gonna have opportunity. He's gonna have a chance to be a child, and I'm gonna be the father, and he's gonna be the child. He's gonna be able to play games. That's my mission, is that he has a real childhood that I didn't get to have. Um, the father whose son was smoking the joint in front of the Ninth Precinct. Um, he thought about it for a minute, and he said, I guess the thing that worries me the most is that he's getting high and he's all by himself. And I said, okay. That's, like that's interesting. Tell me what your thoughts are about that. Like, like I mean, I can definitely understand things there. Like you want to validate immediately. Definitely understand why, like there could be concern with that. What's, where does that concern from? I think I feel like I hear some personal experience, some wisdom, from around that from your own life. Can you tell me about that? And um, so I mean, obviously there's I was thinking maybe it's his story. Actually, it was his brother's story. He said, I was always a good kid until I wasn't, and I got lots of praise for that. But my older brother, he was a bad kid. And he got into drugs at 12 years old. By the time he was 16, he was shooting heroin. Um, and nobody ever noticed. Like my parents were working, my father was an alcoholic. Um, Nobody was paying attention to him. And I um I thought, you know, if I always thought like if I had known that my brother was so unhappy, I could have saved him. Um, wow, I mean, like I heard that story, like it really moved me to tears. I was like, I feel that, and I feel like the desperation in his fear that his son is now going down the same path as his brother was, and that his parenting mission is to make sure that you're never feeling alone, because that's so terrible and it could be deadly. And now this is happening, right? Um, when you find out what the parent's parenting mission is, you validate it. No parent has a bad parenting mission. They may have parenting missions that you need to understand, but no parent is like, my parenting mission is to really mess up my kids and cause them pain. And if that is their parenting mission, then they probably, then we don't do family therapy. Um, but most parents want something good for their kids. And you can say to them with genuine authenticity, right? You can say, that's beautiful. I want to help you be able to give that to your kid. Can we have a conversation about that? About how you can give that to your kid, how you can make sure that your kid doesn't feel alone, how you can make sure that your kid feels supported, how you can make sure that your kid knows that it's okay to be a kid and that he can play and he can have fun in the world. Can we talk about how you can do that? Some things, you know, another question you can ask that gets at the same thing. Um, what's the thing that you would love to be able to give to your child, but that you're not able to give to your child because the conflict between you and your child has gotten to be so extreme? Again, it gets to the same material. When you can offer parents help, not even help, that's the wrong word. When you can offer them company, and I really, you really need to like, this is the tricky part, right? With parents, you have to sit side by side with them and not across from them as an expert. I don't mean literally side by side, right? You understand what I mean? You have to be like, let's think about this together. Let's you and let's sit here and problem solve around how you have a chance to deliver on your parenting mission. Um, you know, it's not me telling you how to parent. It's us together figuring out where this has gone wrong and where are the opportunities. Um, and um, and to be able and then to find a way to be able to deliver on that. And sometimes, like things that I mean, from this place, like the work begins to go in a lot of different directions. Um, you have to invite the parents into more flexibility, right? Well, what if your kid doesn't like to play soccer, though? Is there some other game that would be okay for him to play? Um, the parent, the father and the son actually worked that out, right? Like this father said, well, I like soccer, you like video games, and they, figured they would play like a video game, a FIFA video game together, and they both enjoyed that. Um, you know, I I had a parent once who was like so irate because her son um uh wouldn't wasn't applying himself at math. Like that was the thing that she got so reactive about. The case was more complicated than that, but that was her point of reactivity. Uh, I'd find out about this. Where does this come from? She never got support when she was really good at math, and because her mother was not able to help her get into a good high school and get support on that. She ended up getting into a lot of trouble as an adolescent. Um, and now, she was going to be a good parent, and her kid was going to be good at math. She was going to give him support around that. So it's like, all right, you want to give him what your parents didn't give you, which is support doing the thing that he loves and that he really is good at. For you, it was math, but what if for him it's something else? It seems like an obvious question, but parents get stuck, right? They get stuck like, in couples, like couples get stuck. Like, you didn't clean out the drain. That proves that you didn't love me, right? You get stuck. Like, how many couples sessions have I had where we're talking about cleaning out the drain? All right. I mean, like he should, yeah, she should clean out the drain. You're right. But is that, like, are we talking about the drain or are we talking about ways she can show you that she loves you? And can we get a little bit more flexibility, open-heartedness, right? It's really about like the getting narrow around that is really about keeping your heart closed. Open-heartedness, you're a little bit more open to other possibilities. Um, Sometimes, once you find out the parenting mission, you do genogram work. Um, so like this is and you try to match up, right, what the parent wants to give and what the kid needs. Um, so it's sort of it works from there. These are some questions I like to ask, helping parents feel less vulnerable. Um, I think I've we've talked about most of this already. Um, what would you most like to do for your child with regard to this issue? What about that is important to you? Let's get to the active ingredient. Let's get to the piece here that really matters. Um, can we be more flexible around this? Um, so I got a lot more I could say. I got cases I could present, but maybe we can see if there's any questions before we end. Be happy to ask some questions. I love any kind of question. I love, questions like, what would you do in this kind of circumstance? None of your ideas seem to apply here. Um, I like those kinds of questions.
Incredible. Yeah. And if folks still have questions that they want to put in the chat, please do. We've been recording the questions that you have put in. So I'm looking through, are there families with particular characteristics for whom systems work is not an effective approach to treatment?
Yeah, I would say the only family in which I would not do systems work is where there's issues of dangerousness, right? Like um, you have a, for example, you have a trans kid and a parent who is deeply transphobic, right? So you're going to put them in the room together, and you're just putting the kid into harm's way. Um, Obviously, if there's physical violence, if there's abuse of some kind, you're putting the kid into harm's way. It's contraindicated. Um, but short of that, I mean, if the parent like I have done systems work with a parent who is who was, like abusing drugs, like too many drugs, and was actually getting in the way of the parenting. Um, I mean, I tend to take risks in my work that maybe other people aren't comfortable taking. That's just sort of, um, why that is too long of a question and not relevant to this presentation, but I do. But I would do that, right? And as long as there's no, like, it's not harm, because I think that this drug using parent still wants to be a parent, and maybe they shouldn't live together. Um, but like the parenting that he or she has to offer, the kid should receive and should feel that there's love there, even if there's something that's getting in the way. So, it's a modified version. Um, but if there's a relationship that you can work with, I want to work with it.
That's great. Someone actually did put a question in the chat about what you might do if a case with a trans young person and the mom refused to accept their gender and mom is very inflexible. So you were saying you wouldn't necessarily put them in a room together because that's sort of putting the kid in harm's way.
Yeah,
Is
I mean, look, I might work with the mother and I might say to the mother, um, find out, like I try to be open-minded, find out where her feelings about her trans child come from, what that's about for her. And I'm not trying to convince her at the end, you may say, look, you got a tough choice to make, between your belief system, um, your gut reactions to things and your relationship with your child. If I can help you with that, like that's a tough choice. I recognize it.
Yeah. Um, it seems like that's also to follow up on that question. Someone asked about you said you talk about your discernment about when to ask questions of parents in front of kids and when to ask separately. Are there any sort of like rules of thumb or things that you used from it?
Yeah, sure. I mean, look, if you once you start asking a parent about their past, it's really tricky, right? Because once you ask a parent in for an individual session, it's really tricky because they always hear the same thing. They hear, "Oh, it's my fault," right? And now you're gonna whatever tell me what a messed up parent I am. And once you start talking about my past, they hear one thing. Okay, I had this terrible childhood. It screwed me up, and now it's my fault. There's a lot of vulnerability there. So you need to be careful. You don't want to invite parents to expose a lot of vulnerability in a relationship where they're feeling very activated and attacked. Um, you also don't necessarily want to put kids in a position of being exposed to a lot of parental vulnerability that they shouldn't have to be responsible for. Um, so, when the conversation feels like it needs to veer in that direction of talking about with parents about their reactivity, or talking with them about their feelings of demoralization, very often, probably more often than not, you're going to want to do that individually. And, I think honestly, there's no way to get around the parent feeling like you're calling them before the principal into the principal's office and you're the principal. Hopefully, by the time you do that, I don't start with it, right? Because you want to develop rapport, you want to help the relationship enough that they trust you, that they're at least willing to come in curious, like what they're going to be hit with.
Um, that's great. We have someone in the chat asking about a family of where there's four children and there's a child with social anxiety and getting everybody to school. But I think that this would be an interesting question also about like just dealing with sibling dynamics as well.
Yeah.
Like when you have like one child and then there's other siblings in the home.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And there's a lot of clinical decisions to be made there. First of all, I mean, it's like a axiom in family therapy and systems work that there's never just one person who's suffering, right? So there's somebody who they may say, this person has the suffer, we're all coming in for him. But the working hypothesis is there, like there's other people in the room who are also struggling, that something's going on in the family, and that the symptoms, it's called the identified patient. I'm sure you've all heard that term. Like the symptoms are all getting focused, the worry's all getting focused on this one individual. Um, so, you really want to systematize the problem, right? So we're looking at the relationships. Um, there's a lot of different ways of doing that, to really talk about that would be a whole other presentation. But just, like some of the clinical decisions that you're making, um, if first of all, I always like to see everybody, like bring them all in. Let's see everybody. I want to see how the whole family. Often when you have a really big family, you're going to start breaking things down into subsystems. Um, Father and two of the kids, mother and father and one of the kids. Who's not getting paid attention to in this family because everybody's paying attention to this one with the social anxiety? Let's have a session with that person. Um, what would the siblings say about the problem? They'll say a lot of things that give you a lot of information that you're not going to get from anywhere else. So, you know, when you can when you can systematize the problem, things start to open up, right? Like, a problem that seems really intractable, suddenly you find, oh, it's actually there's conflict between the father and the older daughter, and the younger daughter is acting out, and everything is getting focused on her. The younger daughter is forgotten, and then she's, like doing something that actually just, like is part of the disturbance. So you find other ways in. Again, I mean, there's so many decision points but I definitely want to see I never want to just get stuck with the identified patient because that's the place where things are stuck. Everybody's like, we don't know how to help the identified patient. You don't want to get stuck there.
Um, I think you may have sort of touched on this briefly when you were talking about some of the questions you use um, with young people initially, but I'm wondering if you can maybe elaborate on how you handle the kid that is really stuck in the I don't know, I don't think there's a problem, like I'm just totally like gonna sit there with my arms crossed, and that's sort of like it feels like there's no entry point.
Look, I mean, sometimes you really do encounter kids, particularly older adolescents, who are honestly completely unavailable. I think they're few and far between. I think they often come in that way. And, if you try to engage them and you get frustrated with them, and then you try harder to engage them and get frustrated with them, it's just a bad day in family therapy. Like don't do that. Talk to the people who will talk. Um, Talk to the parents. There again, like sometimes the siblings will talk to the siblings. You want to get somebody to talk, ask their younger sister to talk, and then they'll talk. That's not the way it is, right? Like then they'll talk. Um, so, you don't go into the stuckness, you go around it. And that's part of the benefit of having other people in the room. Um, if like the kid won't talk, and then there's just a parent, I'll talk to the parent and then I'll turn to the kid and I'll say, so your parents worried about you? Or, is she on to something? Eventually, like they get the idea that you're actually interested. The parent says something that's like they so much disagree with, they're going to enter the room.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I appreciate that. We have a bunch of more questions, but I know that we're running out of time and we wanted to make sure everyone has a chance to do the post survey. If folks would like Dr. Davidovitz to come back, please write that on um, your evaluations, and we'll see if we can. He's a very busy guy with a busy schedule, but we'll see what we can do. Thank you all so much for attending. Yeah, so the link to the post survey is in the chat. Um, if you all would take just a second to fill that out. We really appreciate everybody who attended. We will be posting the slides and the recording on the CTAC website, which is mcsilverta.org, within generally 3 to 5 business days. I'm trying to think. You'll be receiving an email about how to get your CEs in your inbox. If you do not get it within like 3 to 5 business days, you can always email us at our website and we can help you out. Sometimes the system takes a little longer. Um, thank you so much, Dr. Davidovitz. This was incredible. And yeah, I thank you all so much for attending.
All right. Thanks to all of you. Bye-bye.